The summer of 1862 was a dreadful one for the Kentuckians. They spent only a few days in Tupelo before being ordered to Vicksburg to aid in the defense of the city against a Union advance. They arrived there only to endure weeks of almost constant shelling from Yankee gunboats. June 6th, reveille at 3 o'clock. Loaded our remaining equipment, and the train started towards Tupelo. The regiment moved into the woods and bivouacked for the day and night. June 7th, fell in at sunrise and marched towards Tupelo. As the division meandered through the long lanes, the sun reflecting on thousands of polished guns, I was struck with the scene. There seemed a tide of melted silver flowing on by the green fields. Soon the day got hot, and dust obscured all such scenery. I had on a new pair of shoes which blistered my feet. Once I pulled them off, but the sand was so hot I could not stand it. I managed to keep up all day, suffered for water, marched 20 miles. June 8th, marched 12 miles to Tupelo, then 5 miles west, and bivouacked. Sore feet mine. Tupelo is a small, dirty-looking town on the Mobile and Ohio Railroad. The war, I presume, has given it something of its dirty appearance. June 10th. Established camp 7 miles west of town in an old field, grown up with persimmon bushes. Hot place. Old Saul's batteries play directly upon us. There can be no dodging. June 11th. Hot. Edibles are running low in camp. Bill of fare, cornbread, pickled beef, very bad, and molasses. Sometimes we get something from the country people. Prices current. Spring chickens, 50 to 75 cents. Tough hens, 80 cents to $1. Old roosters, $1 to $1.25. Turkeys, $1.50 to $2. Old ganders, $1.50. Goose, same. Vegetables, 50 cents for peeping over the fence into the garden. June 13th, our battalion drill at 2 p.m. hot work. All the time, while encamped at Tupelo, had regular drills, and the weather could not have been hotter. There was only one small spring to water the brigade, which was guarded, and no one could get water, save at the regular water calls. June 19th. General Breckinridge's division, being ordered west, marched at an early hour with 3 days' rations and haversacks. At 1 p.m., got to Pontotoc, 15 miles, and bivouacked near town. Though my feet were very sore, went blackberry hunting that evening. June 20th, marched early, cut my shoes so they did not hurt my feet quite so bad, and marched with greater ease. A very hot and dusty march of 18 miles brought us to Lafayette Springs late in the afternoon. Springs not much improved. I believe a 10-pin alley is all the improvements to be seen, with a little stone house over the springs, which are chalabite. Had to cook rations tonight. June 21st. On the road early. Our course led mostly over pine ridges today, very hot and dusty. The 4th, Kentucky marched in front and tried to march us down. About the middle of the day, our boys got mad and commenced double-quicking and cheering. Before that, my feet were so sore I could scarcely walk. But in the excitement, I forgot my feet. We ran over the 4th and went on. At 2 p.m., bivouacked near a nice stream for bathing. June 22nd, marched 7 miles and camped. Went out foraging with Billy A., remained in camp several days, and blackberries being plentiful, we lived well. Had a blackberry cobbler for dinner nearly every day, and George Ambrose would make stacks of pies. Near Abbeville, Mississippi, June 25th. Had reveille before daylight, and by sunrise our column was on the road. 5 miles brought us to Abbeville on the Mississippi Central. The little village looks woebegone now. When I passed it last spring, it was a nice-looking little town. Armies, whether friend or foe, desolate a country. The distance from here to Tupelo is 60 miles. We have just gone through a hot and dusty tramp, bivouacked near town, and waiting for transportation on the railroad. June 28th. Late in the evening, our regiment marched to the depot to take the cars. A flat car next to the engine fell to our company. We also had to pile our camp equipage on the same car, and when all things were ready for the whistle to blow, it was piled up mountain high, indiscriminately, with men, tents, camp chests, camp kettles, etc. At 8 p.m., whirled away towards Jackson. We had the benefit of all the cinders and sparks from the locomotive, and many had their clothing burnt. At midnight, lay over at Grenada for daylight. June 29th, got to Canton at noon and lay over an hour or two. I went to a hotel for dinner, bought a ticket after much crowding, and went into the dining hall with a jam. Was fortunate enough to get a plate and commenced bawling at a waiter to bring something to eat. Now there were few waiters and many fierce soldiers yelling at them, making the eyes of the said waiters grow large and white from fear, and I did not get my roast beef for some time. At last it came, and though I always considered my teeth good, yet I could not even make a print on the piece brought me. Could get nothing else to eat on my plate, and seeing all the rest turn waiters for themselves, I took my plate and also went to the cookroom. There I found a crowd of soldiers with plates in their hands standing around the cook, who was preparing the last thing in the house fit to eat, a beef heart. My heart failed me, and I went back to the train and dined out of my haversack. The train arrived at Jackson in the middle of the afternoon, and we moved out on Vicksburg Road about sundown, ran as far as Clinton, 12 miles, and the train switched off till morning. During the whole trip the sun was very hot, and we had no protection from the heat, being on a flat car. June 30th. The train moved out for Vicksburg in the morning and, until the middle of the afternoon, running to Vicksburg. Very hot day. The trees all along the road hung with long gray moss. The train first ran down near town but back to 4 Mile Bridge, where we dismounted the iron horse and went into camp. We pitched our tents in a beautiful dell under wide-spreading live oaks. After our hot trip, it was quite a luxury to extend out on the grass in the cool shade. We lacked water, though a brook had run through the valley, but now only stagnant pools remained. We had to drink this water, which had a sweet brackish taste. Across the valley, or ravine, was a high trestle-work, which the iron horse was continually crossing. Our camp was nearly under this bridge, and I was often wakened up at night by them puffing and shrieking overhead while crossing the bridge. My friend James Hunter, the fastidious gentleman at home, this evening on detail to dig a well, near the colonel's tent on the margin of the brook. He looks well, has off his shoes, and his breeches are rolled up nearly to the knees. Said breeches have suffered greatly in the rear, and now that he is in the shade, his hat is thrown off, and his soiled shirt is open wide at the collar. He is not very fastidious now, but is merry withal, singing and toiling away with pick and spade in quest of water, which I hope he will find, that is, he and his fellow workers. July 1st. During the forenoon occasionally the boom of cannon would come over the hills from the direction of the river. At 4 p.m. marched into the city 4 miles and halted at the courthouse, which is in the center of town. Here I first saw the Father of Waters, and 3 miles below the city saw the Federal fleet. Their mortar boats were perhaps closer, having covered the rigging with limbs of trees and crept up along the far bank. But now the leaves had died, and they could be plainly seen. I also saw the smoke away up the river, where the Lincoln gunboats lay. About sundown, detailed for picket duty, and was posted upon the river bank above town. Was after dark, and very dark, before we got to our position, and had great difficulty in marching, The bluffs were so steep and rugged. Though the day had been very hot, yet the wind swept down the river at night, cold and disagreeable. Relieved at daylight, or rather we were drawn off, and we returned to the regiment, which had bivouacked above town half a mile during the night. July 2nd, in the forenoon, all quiet. As evening came on, moved down near the city in a ravine close to where Whistling Dick was mounted. The upper fleet soon after commenced shelling from mortar boats, and it seems they knew where we were, for most of the shells fell about our ravine. There can be no dodging from mortar shells. One has to stand bolt upright, like a duck in the rain. Dr. P. and others got into a sinkhole for shelter, but came near being buried alive by a shell. First, we would hear the mortars go boom, 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 away over the bend of the river, and soon after could hear the shells whining high up in the air as they came circling over, and then they would come shrieking down. If they burst in the air, first little tufts of smoke could be seen, then the loud reports as they were burst into fragments, and immediately the jagged pieces would commence humming down, different sized pieces making the different notes in the demoralizing music. I felt sorry for the inhabitants. Those that were left in the city commenced leaving town. I noticed one lady going out a street with 5 or 6 little children about her that were gambling along unconscious, it seemed, of danger, until a bomb burst almost in their midst, when they all huddled about their mother for protection. Late in the evening marched to the lower end of the city, and after dark went down and bivouacked about the lower water battery. Nearly all night long the lower mortar fleet was throwing shells over us into the city. Could first see the flash, then came the report of the mortar, and almost with the thunder came the sound of the rushing shell until it reached the top of the circle. Then could hear it no longer, but could see the light of the fuse, as it were, a meteor traversing the heavens, and presently could hear it crashing among the houses uptown. July 3rd, before daylight moved back into the railroad cut, both fleets shelling all day, but this time did not exactly get our range, expecting to catch fits tomorrow. July 4th. Today we all expected a severe bombardment, but there was not a shell thrown into the city. The fleets fired 33 guns as a salute. July 5th. Returned to camp in the evening, marching out on the railroad. There was no shelling until after we left. July 7th. Marched into town again. Troops have to be kept here all the time to support the batteries. We relieved Preston's brigade, remained until the 11th. Shells falling on the city all the time, but fortunately never in range. We had a good time, having nothing to do but lie around in the shade, eat figs, watermelons, etc. I prefer staying in the city to camp. Here we get good cistern water to drink, and are now used to the shells. July 13th. The regiment marched into the city and left in camp on detail. July 14th. Struck tents, loaded the wagons, and moved camp to the suburbs of town, established in a grassy ravine with a few trees standing about to lend us shade. The day has been very hot. We shall have cistern water hauled to us all the time now. The regiment came in at dark. July 15th. At 9 a.m. heard firing up the river and went up on the bluff to see the cause. Could see a commotion on the upper fleet, which was sending up a dark cloud of smoke and firing. Presently we saw the CS Arkansas coming around the bend, and soon after landed at the levee under our batteries, where there was an enthusiastic crowd assembled to welcome her. Late in the evening marched to our old position about the railroad cut, below the depot, or rather the engine house. The air was full of shells. Just as we were filing off the railroad, up a street, Where there was a high bluff that could protect us, in a measure, from the shells, all the upper batteries opened and were replied to by the upper fleet dropping down before the city. The first intimation we had of this movement, one of those long conical shells 2 feet in length and 10 inches in diameter, came shrieking just over our heads, making something like the noise of a man screaming in agony. Soon the fight became general. The mortar fleet above and below filled the air with bursting shells. The fleet vomited forth iron and flame. Our batteries thundered, making the very earth tremble. Hot shot from the fleet were flying through the air, mimicking the fork-tongued lightning, and the flash of artillery made the night as light as day. To heighten the grand scene, some buildings uptown took fire from hot missiles, and a pillar of flame pierced the very heavens. As the storm cloud passes, so did this. Soon a perfect silence brooded over the city, and we went to sleep. I hardly think the firing lasted an hour. July 18th, about 12 m., a piece of shell wounded one of the colonels badly while lying in his tent. Many of our tents have been cut up, but no one hurt until today. One night, a party was in the quartermaster's tent playing poker, and while piling up the chips, a piece of shell came through the tent, scattering the tea party as well as the chips. Nobody hurt. In the evening, the regiment in town on duty. The mortar fleets keep up shelling. They have regular hours, commence at 10 a.m. and continue until 12 when they knock off for dinner, then commence at 2 p.m. and continue shelling until night. One day, McDee said, when they had stopped for dinner, that he hopes they would have bony fish to eat so they would be a long time getting through. July 21st. The regiment in town on duty. At night, our company deployed on the riverbank with Company G to picket. While in camp, the mosquitoes never bothered us on account of the campfires, but when we would get out on duty like this, where we were not even allowed to smoke a pipe, the mosquitoes would give us fits. I had often heard of their being so large in Texas that they carried a brickbat under their wings with which to wet their bills, but I never believed the story until I came to Vicksburg. July 22nd. Companies withdrawn before daylight, but a few of us were left until after sunup to watch the river to see that no one crossed. We were stationed about 60 yards apart and ordered to secrete ourselves but watch vigilantly. I hid away 'neath a rosy bower by a little white cottage now tenantless and waited for morn. Soon the gray light of morning came. Then came the powerful king of day rejoicing in the east. The landscape was beautiful, and I was admiring it, peeping out from my rosy bower, and occasionally looking out of the corner of my eye at 2 large frigates just below me, their sides bristling with guns, and wondering what would be the consequence. Were they to give us a broadside? When Whistling Dick and company commenced thundering up the river, and I forsook my bower to see what was going on. I saw Essex coming down and give the Arkansas a broadside. After that she closed all her ports. About that time the corporal came along, withdrawing us, and we started uptown. Before we got up the bank, a heavy water battery commenced firing over our heads at the Essex, and the concussion was so great from the balls passing over that we were almost lifted off the ground. The Essex kept on her way, our guns peppering her, but the balls would bounce off as raindrops from a duck's back. Today our regiment lounged about the grounds of S.S. Prentice's castle. The place shows him to have been a man of great taste as well as an orator. We were conspicuous here, and were shelled away in the evening about the time we were starting for camp. July 24th. In town again. Not well. Have been feeling badly several days. At night, a detail was made to report to the Arkansas for duty, and I had to go from our company. It was first thought we were to make up the crew, and one fellow objected so much that he ran off. We all objected to such a fate, and Lieutenant McCutcheon, in charge of the whole detail from the brigade, said that if such was the case, he would resist. We had to wait until morning for all the detail to get together. July 25th. The lieutenant found out that we were to do some work at the Arkansas, and as I did not feel well enough to work, tried to get off, but could not. Went down to the boat and reported, and the captain told us that we would not be wanted until dark, so we went uptown and took up quarters in a large mansion then vacated. There were 50 on the detail. The boys had piano music and dancing, with plenty of books to read. About sundown, a neighboring bee gum was brought in, and we had a sweet time. The ram had gone up the river and did not get back until 9 p.m. We went down then and found out our job was to coal the boat, which had to be done by carrying the coal some distance in bags. I did not work much, got through by midnight, and went back to our house. All day the mortars had been at work, which was the last shelling done that season. July 26th. At daylight saw the lower fleet had gone, and the upper one just disappearing up the river. Went to camp early. That evening moved camp 2 miles from town. Am sick. July 27th. Attended surgeon's call. Am taking intermittent fever. In the forenoon the regiment ordered to leave on the cars. Not able to go, and left in camp, which was to stand. The regiment did not get off today. July 28th. The regiment got off this morning. This evening I learn a car in the train on which our regiment was moving broke down, but no one was seriously hurt. I hope to follow the troops in a few days. Remained in the camp until I left for my command, August 6th. I only had to take medicine 2 or 3 days, as the fever did not get a good hold upon my system. I then applied to follow the regiment, but could not get transportation. Went to Vicksburg one day, and John O'Brien and I went out a short way into the country the day before I left, after peaches, the only times I was out of camp. That camp was like all, monotonous. The evening before I left, John O'Brien and I got some reeds and made a nice bunk to sleep upon at 2:00 a.m. This concludes the 5th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more stories and leave a comment.